Hello, hello, everyone. We have here one more presentation here in the Sophia room. So again, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Hopefully you are safe and well at home and everything is okay. And I wish you the best with you and your whole family. So let's talk about the art of clean code. That sounds an amazing title and so architecture, right? So advanced, at least to me. I'm here with the speaker. Hello, Chiamaka. Did I say your name correctly?
Yeah, it's fine.
So she's software engineer and she has a huge history around the Java community. So she spoke in several huge conferences such as Java Today's, GitHub Africa Meetup, London Java Community. So a community that I love so much, and Techno Day Conference. Welcome here, Kimaka. That's amazing to be here and learn more about the art of clean code.
All right.
And the
Thank
stage is
you.
yours.
Thank you so much for that. Really, really excited to be here. Actually, it's my first time presenting at the JNation conference. So today I'll be talking on the art of clean code. And this is just a brief bio about me. I think you already did the introduction, but just to add, I'm also currently based here in Lagos, Nigeria, and I've mostly been developing like around the fintech space and also working with a lot of Java communities here in Nigeria. So I'm currently a developer advocate for OnStack Africa and also the JVM Nigeria community as well. So I have my Twitter and my LinkedIn in case anyone would just want to reach out. So let's just get right into it. So this quote is actually something that resonates within me, especially when it comes to programming. I know a lot of people have been familiar with clean coding. Some people have practiced it. Some people have just probably heard about it. And that's kind of why I'm here today to just explain a little bit more and go into more details about clean coding. So this is a popular quote actually, and it's by Martin Fowler. And he's just saying that anyone really can write code, and anyone can write code that a computer can understand, but it's only good programmers that can write code that humans would understand. And I feel it's a very important criteria, especially in the world of software development, because you're not just programming for yourself, but you're programming for other people as well. Even though you're currently the one that's writing the code, but you never know tomorrow someone would have to maintain that code at some point, and you want to write something that's easy to understand, especially for humans. So for me, when it comes to clean code, I think of three things: um, simple, understandable, and maintainable. So when you're writing code, you want it to be simple, you want it to be easy to read and also easy to understand. And when we talk about this, we talk about in terms of your variable names, in terms of how you define your functions in the first place, in terms of your code modifications. And when we talk about maintainability, we talk about can someone look at your code, understand it, and be able to work on that code base at any given point in time. So those are the three words I think about when it comes to clean coding. It's quite subjective because a lot of people have different definitions when it comes to clean coding, but for me, it's just writing code that's easy to read and then also easy to understand. So we're going to look at some of the characteristics of clean coding, some of the things you really want to think about when you're practicing clean coding. You need to ensure that your code is easy to read. I think I've probably mentioned this a couple of times. You need to make sure that your code is focused. You're not just defining a class that's doing so many multiple things at the same time. You need to make sure that your code is tested. Unit testing is a very important factor when it comes to writing code. And that's why we're thankful for TDD, which is test-driven development, basically writing your unit test first before you even go into the actual programming. And then you also need to make sure that your code follows the solid principles. Solid principles is something that's quite common in the software development industry. It's the single responsibility principle, and then the open close principle, the LISVOC, the interface segregation, and then the dependency inversion principle. So when you're defining your classes, you need to ensure that your classes are actually just only doing one thing. And I think that's something that people haven't really quite practiced a lot, because I've come across a couple of multiple code bases, and when you're seeing a class and then you're having it do so many multiple things at the same time, and it has me wondering what exactly is the real responsibility for this class in the first place. So we're going to look at how to even start writing clean code. What do you want to do when you talk about, oh, okay, I want to start writing clean code as a programmer in today's world? First of all, it's quite easy, actually, but also at the same time quite difficult. So like for me, I struggle when it comes to declaring variable names. I don't know if it's something that most people have actually struggled with, but for me, it's something that I've struggled with a lot. And one of the questions I try to ask myself is, what exactly am I trying to do in the first place? What do I want this variable to do for me? Or why should it even exist in my code in the first place? And then that just enables me to define exactly what I'm trying to do and to get a particular name for my variables in the first place. So another thing would be when it comes to writing your classes, when it comes to defining your functions. Functions are methods, and your methods should be able to do something. So it's kind of easy to define your functions because you know that when you're defining functions, you want to use verbs, you want to use action words in the first place. So when we come to defining variables, we can see an example here, and this person is just defining A as 100. And for someone like me who's probably not even used to this code, I'd be confused. I'm like, okay, what does A mean? What does X mean? What does Y mean? And it's going to be hard for someone to take over that particular code because you want it to be easy for the person. So instead of having the definition of A, you want to have the definition of max score, because it just tells me that, oh, okay, this is the maximum score that's required, or this is the role, an admin role, or this is a has access, a Boolean in the first place. So you want to be able to write variables or to give names that are meaningful, names that are descriptive, something that I could see and then I can understand. And I've seen a couple of people do this actually quite a lot. And most of the time, they don't even know the implications behind it, because at the end of the day, you're trying to write code that's working. So you're not trying to write code because, oh, someone else is going to read it or someone else is going to take over that code. Or you're just trying to write code because you want to get it to work. I mean, yeah, it's good. You would get it to work. But at the end of the day, you'd realize that it's not just about getting your code to work, but it's also about getting it to be easily readable, easily understandable. I shouldn't have to go through any code and be confused at any point in time. So this is just for naming. And then when it comes to classes, like I said earlier, you want to have nouns represented as classes. So here we have handle accounts. No, instead we want to have accounts handler. It's quite different. And then when it comes to defining your classes, you want to use the right access modifiers. You want to use the right variables in your classes, the right naming convention in your classes. And you also want to be consistent. You don't want to use camel case in here and then you're using another different case in somewhere else. You want to make sure that your code is easily readable and easily defined. And in this other example, we can see that, okay, this is just checking if the length of the classes of students is less than 7. And what the 7 represents, because I'm looking at this and I was like, okay, it's less than 7. or what does it represent? And this is where we have constants. This is where we should actually define constants. So instead of saying, oh, okay, it's less than or it's greater than 7, you can say, you can have a constant that's defined here as max classes per student. So I know, okay, we're actually looking at this condition to know which, if it's less than or if it's greater than the max class per student. And it's, like I said, it just makes things a lot more easier, especially for anyone who at any point would read your code. Another way to write clean code is writing clean functions. And I've seen functions that are like over 20 lines of code. And then I'm wondering, okay, can this be broken down into smaller functions? Functions should only do one thing, and they should do it well. They should only have one particular reason to change and not just changing for many other reasons. You want to keep your arguments in your functions as low as possible. I'd say like maximum of 3, if possible. And if it's actually quite more than that, you can wrap them into classes. You don't want to take arguments that's like over 5 or over 6 or 3, and then you're wondering, okay, what exactly are you trying to do or what are you trying to achieve? And your functions should be small. I'd say like 10, 15 lines of code is okay, but some people could do quite more than that, depending on what exactly you're trying to achieve. But I feel like the smaller it is, the better it is to understand, and also ensure that your functions are actually just doing one thing. I used to, when I started out programming, I didn't really take all this into considerations. I'd write functions with like over 15 lines of code because I was just starting out. But the good thing is that when you start working with people who are actually maybe way more experienced, you have them telling you all these things. Okay, no, you shouldn't do this. You should have to break down your functions, have them into like smaller functions and have them to do one thing. And the good thing about that is that it makes unit testing a lot more easier for you. When it comes to unit tests, you're testing one functionality in the first place. So if your function is doing one thing, you're able to unit test it very well. And then another thing when it comes to naming functions, like I said earlier, is using verbs. So you can see an example here. We have accounts. What does accounts really mean? And then you have get accounts, which actually tells you, okay, so this function is trying to get probably a list of accounts. And it just makes it more descriptive in your code. So if you look at this function here, you can see it's actually there to render a page with setup and teardowns. But it's quite complicated because it's doing so many things. And for me, when I see this in the first place, I'm quite confused. Okay, what exactly are you trying to do? But when you look at this example here, you can see that, first of all, it's not as long as this function. And for me, merely looking at it, I feel like this is more readable. This is more understandable. I mean, I don't even have to go through it, but I already know, okay, this is something that I definitely would want to look at. But when I see functions that are like over 10 or 15 lines of code, I'm quite confused as to what exactly is this function trying to do. And like I said earlier, instead of having this, we've broken it down a little bit more here and having like a separate function that's doing any other thing that you'd have it do. Okay, so not everyone likes having comments in code, and some people would still argue that yes, comments should be in your code. For me, I'd say avoid it if possible, but only use it if you feel like it's important to have like more clarification on what exactly you're trying to achieve. Some people might not even like to have comments in your code in the first place, but then some people do. But for me, I'd say just try to avoid it if you can. And then if you have to, or if it's necessary, just keep them as short and as simple as possible. Another bad practice too that some people might do is just to have commented codes in your code base. And I'm wondering, like, why do you have to comment it out? If you don't need it, if it shouldn't be there, you need to take it out, because it kind of just doesn't give that proper feel as to when someone else is going to read your code and saying, oh, okay, why are you trying to comment this out in the first place? So avoid commenting out code if possible. And then your code is the best documentation. So I feel like if you're writing clean code, it's very explanatory. Someone else might pick up your code and find it very easy to work with. And that should always be your drive when coding. You're writing code, yeah, you're writing code that you want code to work, but you're also writing code that people would have to read and people would have to understand. And I've mentioned a couple of things too about classes. A class name should always show its responsibility. A class name should usually have to be nouns. And your class should be short. There's really no need to have like very long classes or very long lines of code in your classes. And it should just have one responsibility. I think that's the real reason behind most of this principles that we have in software development when it comes to solid principles. They're kind of like guidelines as to writing clean code. That's why they even exist in the first place. At the end of the day, humans would have to read your code. Humans would have to work on your code. So you want to make sure that you're leaving the best code as possible. And also when it comes to testing, testing is something that's very, very important. Most people would agree, most people won't, but I'd say it's always advisable to follow the test-driven development approach. And for unit testing, your test should be short, your test should be able to define a particular function or a particular method or what exactly it's trying to do. And you always use one assert per test. I've seen a couple of people use like multiple asserts in tests. Ideally, it's not really the best practice. It's always good to use one assert in your test, and not only asserting for a particular scenario, but also asserting that another scenario would fail and what should happen when it fails. I think that's another important criteria to focus on when writing unit tests. So this is just some of the common conventions when it comes to clean coding. There's a lot more. I believe that clean coding is a craft. It's not something you learn just at once and then, oh, okay, so I've learned it, I'm okay with it. It's something that you continue to practice. And the more you practice it, the more your code gets better, the more you're able to write clean code and efficient code. So now the real question is, why should I care? Like, why should I even bother writing clean code, right? Because as long as the code works, then I'm good. But in real honesty, like I said earlier, you usually are not writing code for yourself. You know, you're writing code that's going to be maintainable by different people. And you want to make sure that anyone who's reading your code, anyone who's going through it, is able to understand it and is able to continue from there. And then you want to make sure that whoever, whether it's your colleague or anyone that's going to pick up that particular code at any point in time, is able to understand it. So it's like wanting to work better as a team, especially in your own place of work. And then it also makes your code reusable. You know, if your code is clean, most likely, definitely people would want to reuse it. You would want to reuse it in first, and it makes you more efficient as a developer, writing code that's clean and also very reusable. And another important factor is growth, which is very, very important, especially when it comes to the tech industry. When you're learning clean code, you're learning a craft, you know, and it's something that you might not be able to have at that instant. You might not be able to grab everything at once, but it's something that takes constant practice. And the more you practice, the more you grow in it, the more you learn from it, the more it becomes a part of you. And it's something that most people want to have. Most people want to have developers or people who write clean and efficient code, which is something that has to be practiced and practiced over time. And if you're actually looking to learn more about clean code, there's a a quite popular book by Robert Martin, which is Clean Code, a handbook of agile and software craftsmanship. And there's also refactoring, improving the design of existing code, the pragmatic program. I think this is one I'm actually reading and it's quite interesting. And Medium. I'm a huge fan of Medium. I love the fact that a lot of people share most of the experiences, most of your journey on Medium. It's also a very great resource for anyone who's looking to learn programming or learn anything at all. Medium is an awesome resource. So yeah, I think that's really all for now. And this is also another important quote. It's not enough to write code well. Code has to be kept clean over time. Leave the calm ground cleaner than you found it. And it's something that I believe you have to write good code. And as a programmer, I feel like it's something that's really, really important because not just for yourself, but for other people who at any point in time would have to work on your code. So thank you all for having me. This is the end of my presentation.
Oh, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you to share your knowledge. That was great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have one question before everybody. That's advantage to be the host and also the attendee. You mentioned about the clean test, how fast it could be, right? And um, how do you feel about the integration test? Because it will take longer than Unity one. So do you have any recommendation and tips to handle with that?
So any recommendation concerning handling integration tests?
Yeah, the difference between integration test, how much or how many should I put instead of Unity, or each one should I put more priority to put in my code, for example?
Okay, so I feel for me, I'd say unit testing. And this is because when you're unit testing, you're testing like small fractions of your code, or you're testing like methods in your code or sub functions in your code. But when you're doing an integration test, it's like you're testing the whole application or seeing just end to end testing of how everything works. But unit testing is like independent of each other. So you're just basically testing smaller chunks of code or smaller functions in your code. And for me, I feel unit testing, because unit testing is still in one way or the other part of integration testing. So if your unit test works fine, then your integration test should definitely work fine. So, but that's just my opinion anyways.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, there's one question here. How to keep reminder these items? It can be easily lost over time.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
How to keep reminded the fact of keep the code clean every single time.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, clean coding takes time. It takes a lot of practice. So for me, what I try to do is to read a lot of, well, not a lot, but I try to read a lot of articles. I try to read books as well, because the more you read, the more you understand, and the more you see the reason why you have to write clean code. For me, that's really just the motivation, and I think that's something that people are looking for, is that motivation to want to write clean code. So I'd say read more articles, read more resources. By the time you start practicing it, you start seeing the benefits of it. Yeah, so that's what I think.
Okay, there's one question here. Is that the ideal number of line recommended in Java class as well as for a method?
Okay, so I think it's quite subjective. But for me, I like to keep my methods like 10 lines of code. For classes, maybe something a little bit longer. So I don't think there's actually an ideal like number of lines to say, oh, okay, this is like the ideal number of lines you should have for your classes and your methods. Or I'd say just keep it as short as possible. Yeah.
Okay, let everyone, you have opportunity to fire more question here. So you as clean coder, how hard is to manage the perfect code and the code is possible to deliver this product? I mean, how can I measure that?
So if I get you right, you're saying how can you measure if your code is perfect or if your code is clean?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there are tools that really help with this. I, for one, use Sonalint, and it's an awesome plugin that IntelliJ has. I don't know what ID you're using, but I think most IDs do have Sonalint. So that kind of really helps you. So for me, if I want to measure, I'm like, okay, if Sonalint isn't prompting me for any changes or any refactoring, then I know, okay, my code is good, right? Because I don't think there's really a, a proper way as to measurement, but I feel like once you're able to write code that you can understand for one, and then someone else too can see that code and then understand, and then you can say, okay, you've reached like a certain level when it comes to clean coding. And also using tools as well. Sonalint is a very good plugin. I feel like I would recommend to anyone.
Okay. So everybody, we have the opportunity to fire more questions. So give once, give twice. So if there's no further questions, thank you. That was an amazing presentation. Chiamaka. I hope see you around, not just in this conference, but in several Java conference possible. And soon as you can get, the
All right.
vaccination is ready, you can be there physically.
All right. No problem. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. See you.